Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your coordinator, facilitator, hostess. And as always, today we have a fascinating topic of interest to the gay and lesbian community, and I think beyond, because today we're going to talk about immigration issues, specifically the way in which they might impact our community and the way our community participates in the larger world of immigration. As you know, there are lots and lots of people in the world that want to come to the United States, and the United States has laws and rules about who can come into the country. There are only certain ways in which one would qualify. We don't have open borders. So there have been a number of problems that have arisen and are gaining visibility but don't have much visibility yet in the community, hence the reason for this show. It's my pleasure to welcome today as our guests Jeff Kim from the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center, who's Deputy Director of Legal Services and Coordinator of the immigration cases there. Welcome, Jeff.
Welcome. Thank you.
Right, and I feel welcome too. That was nice.
I'm welcome then.
No, that was nice. Next is Chris Haiss, who's the co-chair of an organization called Immigration Equality, which is the Los Angeles chapter of the Lesbian and Gay Immigration Rights Task Force. Welcome,
Yes,
Chris.
thank you.
Happy you're here.
I'm glad to.
And finally, Tim Miller, whose face you might know if you've been to any of his 40,000 shows over the past several years, a great solo performer, founding director of Highways here in Los Angeles, which is a, as he put it, a fierce alternative arts center. And you probably remember that Tim was also one of those singled out by the National Endowment for the Arts for non-funding because he told too much of the truth, not just about our community, but I think about the world. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks.
Jeff, I want to start with you. Just basically, as you kind of explained it to me the other day, there are a number of issues that arise for our community related to immigration. Some of our community from other countries seek asylum based on persecution in their countries. Some want to come here because their relatives are here, their family is here, but run into a problem because if you're married to a United States citizen, you can get in, but if you're not, and of course we're not allowed to marry, you run into a problem. Or you may need to prove that you have a job. There may be an employer who wants you here. And there are also exclusions, people who, even if they were to qualify under any of those issues or the lottery that I guess other countries are allowed to engage in to get people here, they may still be excluded on certain bases. So let me start out asking you about the issue of asylum. How does that work, and has it changed recently in terms of how the United States is looking at people applying for asylum?
Sure, Sheila. Asylum is a very important way for our community to come to the United States. Asylum was created in the aftermath of World War II when everyone realized that millions of people had unnecessarily died because countries didn't really understand the concept of refugees. So there was a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the whole asylum mechanism was created. And it's something that's evolved over the years. People who are fleeing persecution based on race or religion or opinion or nationality or a category called membership in a particular social group are allowed to seek asylum. And so you've got these obvious categories of race, etc. Relatively recently, the United States has joined other countries in understanding that persons persecuted on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity should also have access to asylum. In 1990, just a decade ago, a man by the name of Toboso Alfonso, a Cuban, was granted asylum by the Board of Immigration Appeals, and it was the first time that the U.S. government said that gays and lesbians could be counted in this catch-all category called membership in a particular social group. Before then, we didn't have access to asylum.
So was that a lack of understanding or even belief or credibility as to how endangered we were in other countries, how persecuted we were?
I think a lot of it had to do with just pure homophobia. People believe that we could change, that it's not an immutable characteristic, so why should they have protections like that people who are persecuted on the basis of their race get. So I think it was pure homophobia. But thankfully, Attorney General Reno in 1994 took a look at that decision that was made in 1990 and said, okay, we're going to make this the policy of the U.S. government so that that advocates for gays and lesbians seeking asylum in the United States didn't have to go through so many hoops just to prove that they even should apply for asylum.
Now, how do you apply for asylum? Do you apply from the country where you are, or do you have to swim to shore and somehow show up and say, I want asylum?
If you're outside of the country, then you're actually known as a refugee. You're trying to apply through the mechanisms outside of the United States. It's a much harder prospect than if you're actually in the United States. So, as a term of art, asylum means asylees are folks who apply from within the United States. They're already here, and they realize that if they were made to go back to their home country, they'd face all sorts of horrible things.
So they may be here so-called legally or illegally, right?
Right. Doesn't matter how you're here. If you can prove that you have a well-founded fear of persecution because of your sexual orientation in your home country, and the asylum officer, the immigration judge, believes your case, then you'll get asylum.
So you could say, well, I have a well-founded fear of persecution because I'm gay, and in my country that means a death sentence. But before this recognition of our category, was it the case that we simply weren't believed? There must have been evidence that, there was significant persecution.
Oh, that there was, but they made a decision not to give asylum.
And so people were returned to their countries. And
yes, and it's also important to remember that for the longest time, gays and lesbians were considered in asylum law, as in many other areas of the law, sexual deviants or biological errors, or something was wrong with them, so that they didn't deserve, in the immigration law until 1990, until it was corrected in the 1990 revisions, we could be excluded just because of our sexual orientation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, as I indicated, and I think it may be a way to also talk about these exclusions, you could qualify in any way, one of the ways that is required. You might win the lottery in, Ireland or Ethiopia or wherever. I don't mean literally, but I mean have your number come up, I guess, as the next person who will be allowed to emigrate to the United States and still be excluded on certain bases.
That's correct.
And what I heard you say was before 1990, simple sexual orientation in and of itself was a basis for exclusion, but it no longer is.
Right.
But HIV status is, isn't it?
Yes, that was after 1990. I think some folks who really weren't pleased with that change tried to find other ways, surrogate ways, to maybe put a roadblock for our community to emigrate to the United States. And so I think in 1993, under the leadership of Jesse Helms, the HIV exclusion was passed, and that's been in effect since then. And many people protested this particular ground of exclusion because until then, the public health authorities in the United States were the ones who made a decision whether or not a particular disease would be the grounds for excluding somebody. It was not a political decision. It was a medical decision. But in '93, they codified one disease. They just named it HIV and AIDS. So in a way, they're kind of singling it out in a special way. They're singling out that category.
So other communicable diseases would not be found in statute,
Right.
but the public health authorities, now are there sort of across-the-board exclusions for other medical conditions?
There's a category known as communicable diseases, but again, that's determined by medical professionals. The Public Health Service of the United States determines what diseases go on that list, and if you have a medical advancement, they maybe can deal with that disease, maybe it will be removed by them. But unfortunately, HIV is written in the law, so even if even if it was not a threat anymore, and I would argue that it's not really a threat, it's still in the law, so you'd have to exclude people based on their HIV status.
What are the other bases of exclusion?
You've got a whole host, and actually Congress revised or reformed the law in 1996 and added many grounds that many immigrant rights advocates are just appalled by. They vastly expanded the crimes, the category of crimes to which people can be excluded or deported. And so now you have situations where people who've been here for decades somehow get in contact with the INS, let's say at a checkpoint or something, or they're coming back from a trip from abroad, and out pops a very minor crime or a series of minor crimes, really minor. And that, someone who's been living peacefully and law-abidingly for decades, there have been stories of people being deported.
Well, there must be some overlap here then, because I would assume in many countries simply being gay is a crime.
Yes.
Would that be then, if you've been prosecuted in your country for nothing else except your sexual orientation status?
Mm-hmm.
Because in America we don't like status crimes, or at least we try not to. But in many countries you simply are something and therefore you're a criminal. Would that be sufficient basis for exclusion? You've been prosecuted in your country for being gay?
Very good question. I would doubt that, no.
Because that would
These
go...
are crimes you've committed in the United States.
Right, that would be going from prosecution to persecution.
Exactly.
I mean, in a way, it's, it would be difficult to draw the line.
Many would argue that that's actually, you should give asylum for somebody who's been prosecuted in their home country just for being who they are.
Well, it is an aspect of the persecution,
Exactly.
is that the law itself would be so draconian. Well, Chris, there's obviously another problem that that we face as a community, mm-hmm. and you had talked to me about the sort of the relationship issue, and Tim, I think you're the sort of the reigning expert on this at the moment. Can you talk a little bit about your situation and the basis of it is that one of the ways that people from other countries can be allowed to immigrate to the United States is because they are married to or related to a United States citizen, right? So what is your circumstance?
Well, I've been in a relationship for 6 years with my partner Alistair, who's a Australian national, though also has British citizenship. And it's really been this amazing journey, and I've followed, immigration inequality in terms of lesbian and gay issues for a long time, around horror stories of people wearing a pink triangle who refused entry at an airport during the worst of things 10 years ago, and of course the HIV exclusions that Jeff's been talking about. But it all really was brought home to me by the fact that as an American citizen, my relationship of 6 years is absolutely not only not valued, but is deeply disrespected, and I'm penalized for. And of course, where any heterosexual person, U.S. citizen, could meet someone after the show today and get in their car and drive to Las Vegas, and 5 hours from now be at a wedding chapel, get married, and tomorrow could go to an INS office and begin the process for a fiancé green card. And almost certainly, unless their foreign partner had blown up a bridge somewhere, would eventually, weaving through a bureaucratic process, get a green card and could then become a U.S. citizen. This is someone you could meet, and tomorrow begin that process, where no lesbian or gay American citizen can, even if you're together with your partner for 30, 40, or 50 years, will our relationships under current law be ever respected, the humanity of the relationships be respected for immigration purposes. And this really blew my brains out, because it's so grotesquely unfair. It's just so ridiculous that one U.S. citizen, a heterosexual U.S. citizen, has this huge right, this huge special right, of course, which is to fall in love with someone from another country, invite them into your nation to share your life, share your home, and that our government respects the relationship values through marriage, which is a whole other discussion, since of course we're denied all of those, hundreds and hundreds of special rights that are reserved for heterosexuals. But this is one huge, really, really shockingly unjust one, because it's very hard to get around. Some of the other special rights reserved for straight people through marriage, you can, if you've got a clever lawyer, you can kind of finesse it.
You fill out 100,000 pieces of paper and you get the same kind, or you might be able to get medical benefits or adopt each other or whatever.
Figure out property or all that. Or cobble together domestic partnerships as in certain states and municipalities. But this one is because it's federal, it's existential, because as Alistair and I are facing, when his student visa ends a year from now, we're really offered three options by American law right now. We can break up, they'll deport Alistair, or together we'll have to go into exile. and either seek asylum in Canada under their more, one of the most progressive immigration laws. Or fortunately, unlike the United States, Alistair's two countries, Australia and Great Britain, would respect the humanness of our relationship, and I could immigrate to Australia or Great Britain as Alistair's partner. Of course, as an American, citizen, the idea that I have to leave my country to maintain my gay family is so upsetting. So of course, I made a show about it.
Well, you are an artist after all.
Right.
So you made a show about it. I know you've been touring with this show. What do you do in your show?
Well, it's a piece called Glory Box, which is the Australian expression for hope chest, the container of things for marriage. And the piece really engages what Alistair and I have been going through, the dramas of visas refused, being separated by some cranky American worker in a consulate in Australia that kept us apart for 6 months because they wouldn't give Alistair a piece of paper. I'm wanting to touch on the huge, gross inequities of the denial of relationship rights to gay people, but also to tell a love story and a really, really emotional story of the fact that these relationships are being destroyed by our government. Every week I hear about somebody who's separated at an airport, or they're forced to, there's a whole community of expatriate American citizens in Vancouver right now. It seems to be the destination of people who've just, since we're not respected here, we have to go somewhere where our love is valued. So I've turned it into a show, which I think is a really good piece, and it's two things. One, to educate people, to gain awareness, because most lesbian and gay people are not so aware of this issue and forget the larger community. But also simultaneously as an educational tool, but also to kind of do a little grassroots organizing wherever I go. And I've already done the show in about 30 cities, and it's performance, even at a small scale of performing in these theaters and museums. It's a really good way to, through media, you get attention. Suddenly people become aware of the issue. And as I've traveled around, it's just been so moving to meet the hundreds and hundreds of lesbian and gay binational couples, and to hear their stories and these horrors. And as painful as that is, and also what Alistair and I are going through, it's also so inspiring, because it's a real testament to love and the power of lesbian and gay relationship and love that people are managing. It's hard enough to have a relationship, period, but to have one when your own government is actively trying to destroy your relationship is very challenging.
Well, you told me a story about a couple in San Diego, and it made me think about the sort of the next rings of people who are affected as well. Two women, I believe, that have children.
Yeah, this is kind of, through the performances, of course, you gather community, you get 200 or 300 people together in San Diego. And I almost always do, audience dialogues at the end of the show. And there are many binational couples there. A lesbian couple, a French woman and her American partner, shared this really horrific. I think they probably have been forced to leave by now, because of course France, like every other, almost every Western country, and Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, and Namibia, getting my list in, respects the basic humanity of lesbian and gay love, for these purposes. But since our country does not respect our humanity, we're forced to leave, to go into exile in France, which is one thing. We don't think, oh, this isn't just them. Of course, it's affecting their co-workers, their friends, their family, and the parents of the American citizen were there, who are this lesbian couple had 2 children. Of course, the grandparents they're getting up and talking in front of this audience. Not only is our daughter and our daughter-in-law, their word, forced to leave, but we are not going to. Our grandchildren are being forced to leave, because American government tries to destroy lesbian and gay families whenever it possibly can.
Wow.
And it was, the audience is crying, and the grandparents are crying, and it was so moving. And just for those 200 or 300 people in San Diego who had probably never thought about this issue before, to suddenly realize that our country, our laws, are actively flinging these loving relationships and their children, freaking out their families, their friends, their kind of complex weave of community. It got people so mad, and it was very exciting.
It should. And it's always been interesting to me. I mean, you are an artist, and yet, or in addition, you've really chosen to completely devote your work to political issues to social issues to stirring the pot to, to making people think. And there are a lot of people in our community even who are artists and performers, but they don't make the experience of our community sort of the essence of their work. Has it been a satisfying thing for you?
I think, yeah, along with that feeling of just being in awe of these binational couples I'm meeting, the other thing, it's really been a great reminder, just the power of art. And because it's, I'm one guy with my little pasted together maps of the world, and I'm, do the show in 70 or 80 cities over a couple years. But when, out of a visit to Phoenix or Atlanta, a new chapter of people, of binational couples come together and they start organizing and, form, Phoenix Lesbian and Gay Immigration Rights Task Force, or as happened in June, out of challenging the audience to, because we'll talk about it, there's currently a bill that's been introduced in Congress that would remedy this, challenging the audience to call a specific congressperson in Atlanta, the fabulous congressperson John Lewis, and 2 weeks later to have, and through, a dozen phone calls from upset, feeling-full audience members who've just kind of lived with this can have an impact. And
really can.
Yeah, and so that's just really, not to toot my own horn with this, it's more just the power of raising our voices, whether it's through art or activism, but specifically to remember that art is a great way of building community and creating change.
Well, it's, and you brought up the issue of activism, and I was interested, Chris, because I had not heard of immigration equality until now, but would you kind of elucidate a little bit on your work and how it relates to some of these couples that Tim is talking about, and the real issue of our inability to keep our families together in the United States?
Yeah, actually what we're trying to do is give support to those couples, which is very hard because, it's such a cruelty to forcefully separate a loving, caring couple. And this to me, it always reminds me of Nazi Germany, where yes, there are these laws, but it's laws we created, and then we think this is now the law we have to enforce. Like there's nothing more important than actually tearing loving couples apart. And rather than, supporting people, loving people. And we try to give support to couples, which is not easy because, of course, lots of people are afraid, lots of couples are afraid. They're asking, well, if we come to the meeting, is there an INS officer who follows me home and then deports my partner? And I can see their fear, and it's actually so sad that there are people in this free country who, who do their jobs, who pay their taxes, who actually have to live in this fear, in this constant fear, just because some people don't agree with the person they fell in love to. Now, nowadays in this world, we're traveling all over the places. You don't know with whom you fall in love tomorrow, but if it happens to be someone of your own sex, and if it happens that this is someone from another country, you're going to have a problem because you are really forced to choose between your country and your lover. And I think this is a very cruel situation.
Well, I think we would all agree, and I think people watching would agree too, but the issue hasn't had a great deal of visibility in our community.
Yes.
And I think, of course, it deserves greater visibility. Tell me more about the national the task force, of which you said Immigration Equality is the Los Angeles chapter.
Yes. The Lesbian and Gay Immigration Rights Task Force is located, the headquarters is located in New York City, and they give support and try to help people creating local chapters, also what Tim Muller talked about, those local chapters, and trying to support them in their activism. One basic point is that we also try to educate each and everybody about this issue, because how can straight people know about it if even the queer community is not aware that there is such a problem? And from our own outreach, if we go like to gay pride festivals, lots of times, people stop and can't believe that this is such a serious thing that's going on in this free country. Like we're criticizing other countries for their inhumane habits, and we're actually doing the same, because we say one group of people, one group of citizens it's just not worth to have same or equal rights and same protection under current laws.
So tell me a little bit about the legislation that's been proposed.
Well, and it was Congressman Nadler from the state of New York who introduced H.R. 3650, the Permanent Partners Immigration Act, in February 14th, Valentine's Day. And that law actually, if it would pass, well, probably won't, we don't know, it would actually stop this inequality because it would allow the U.S. citizen and the legal permanent resident to sponsor their foreign partner for the purpose of residing here in the United States.
Now, is it limited to same-sex couples?
It actually says permanent partners, in referring to permanent partners, those who are not able to marry their partner.
Obviously, because I would think there would be a sort of an inherent weakness in Congress where they might say, well, if it wasn't limited in some way, you could just bring in, you know, a friend or just someone who paid you, obviously, to do it.
Right, but you also don't know, like what we talked before, like with straight marriages, who controls this, who checks that, you know? And so
Well, and how
asking
many
us to
marriages-
live to a much higher standard, it's kind of a little bit funny to
Well,
me.
not only that, but we all know that over the course of certainly my whole lifetime, I've heard of people, you know, arranging marriages so that they could be here, and then of course the government passed this law having to do with staying in your marriage for a couple of years so it wouldn't be a sham, and all kinds of things that people do to try to, you know, make their lives work. In essence. Well, the immigration rights community, the sort of, I guess we would say, the larger immigration rights community, ones that we normally associate with national origin discrimination or race discrimination, how have they received or embraced or rejected or welcomed or not our participation in the immigration rights sort of struggle?
Well, the larger immigration community is not aware of our situation, and you also find out if you call the one or other group and asking, well, did you ever hear about H.R. 3650, Permanent Partners Immigration Act? Usually they never heard of it. So for us it's also very important to raise this awareness inside the immigration community, outside of that, within the queer community, outside of that, and really speak up wherever we can to whomever we meet. And people, most of the people I talk to, like in Tim's case, they are concerned. I mean, you always have a few who don't care about it, but they're almost like shocked if you really make it clear to them, look, this is going on in our country.
But does immigration equality have at least the beginning of some kind of relationship with the rest of the immigration
we
community?
actually started building some bridges with some of the organizations and groups, also like different ethnic groups. And it was quite interesting because just this year it was Sheila, the Coalition for Humane Immigration Rights Los Angeles, who actually drafted an amnesty proposal, and they put in their proposal also domestic partners, actually trying to unify workers' families and domestic partners.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to me because the gay and lesbian activism, like most sort of identity activism, when we first started out, was very kind of insular. It was about us. We were the only ones doing it. We were the only ones who cared about it. And over the years, it seems in so many of our different issues and arenas, we've started and had to make connection, to build coalition in recognition that other people suffering because of discrimination isn't all that different. And we're also having to sell them on the fact that ours isn't all that different. I mean, I've seen this, for instance, in the labor movement. And we actually had a discussion in one of our shows about that, where there are so many gay and lesbian people in the labor movement who couldn't come out. Partly because there are a lot of ethnicity in the labor movement that was not so welcoming to gay and lesbian folks, and partly because it just didn't seem like, you know, that was the most important discrimination issue when we're talking about working people. So I'm interested to see, and I will be interested to see, how our issues get integrated, if they do, with other immigration issues, because that's been a very, very active movement. Though I think not, not very well funded, certainly, not very grassroots. And I assume that our immigration activism is very much the same, very grassroots.
Yes, and immigration equality, we're a handful of volunteers who try to do everything besides the regular jobs. And yes, I think we're all aware that we have to do so much more. But for our outreach, we just recently received a grant from the Liberty Hill Foundation. In order, that money would give us some way to really spread the word, and doing all kinds of things. For example, we also have scheduled town hall meetings with different groups and different community groups, and one is specifically set up for the straight immigration community, target those. And so we really try to, to spread the word all over the place, but you also need some people who want to listen. Hopefully we have enough.
It's true. Well, Jeff, what kind of support do you get for your work at the center? I mean, has it been difficult to sort of integrate the immigration issues in the legal services department? Did you bring the issues to them, or how did this become something the center did?
Not really. It hasn't been difficult. I think it's been very natural because the center provides so many social services, and many of the recipients of the services are immigrants, and so the issues around immigration status come up in all different contexts. So it hasn't been that difficult, and actually we decided to focus, put a concerted focus on immigration around the time of Prop 187, because in 1993, 1994, because we recognized that we were just getting more calls from immigrants who were just concerned about, they hadn't even been dealing with their immigration status, and all of a sudden they faced this strong anti-immigrant climate in the United States, in California, and they wanted to know what they could do to get their papers, what they can do to legalize, etc. So we were just getting a bump up in calls, and so we decided internally to focus on providing immigration services, bringing in members of the attorney community to talk to clients and counsel them. And so since that time, we've just been growing. I mean, LA County is, 30–40% immigrants, and one of the largest gay and lesbian populations in the country. And so you put the two together, and you're going to have tens of thousands of immigrants, queer immigrants, and many of them are going to need immigration services or have questions or could benefit from HR 3650.
You mentioned Prop 187. People outside California may not know, although I know they know that we have tons of initiatives every year because we have a bad reputation because of all of our sort of awkward lawmaking through initiatives. But Prop 187 was a proposed initiative which failed, which would have said that if you are, actually it failed in the courts, but if you are here without papers, you could not get public education, and you couldn't get any public medical treatment. And it was a terrible idea because, frankly, what you're doing is saying to people, you can't go to school, but you're here. You can't get medical treatment, but you're sick, and you're here. So I thought it was, obviously, and spoke out against it and campaigned against it. But I wonder whether there were people in our community who really got it in terms of the connection or not. I mean, there's really sort of two sets of connection that I always see. One of them is the relationship of one kind of discrimination with another. That is, we're, gay and we get discriminated against. Do we understand how important it is to show up for other people's issues? And of course, the second connection, which we now learn about, which is the overlap of our gay community and immigration community. Didn't seem to me like I heard much in our community about 187, did you?
In the service community you did. I don't know if in the general public. In the service community, many of us rallied around, because we serve, especially in the HIV community, we rallied around, well, if the law passes and it's enforced, we will not have any part in that the enforcement of that law, because we have clients whose lives are on the line, and we can't, check their immigration status and deny them services because of this or that. But I did notice that, we also were getting some calls from people who were questioning why the Gay and Lesbian Center was getting involved with immigration, they would say, it's not a gay and lesbian issue. Why are you getting involved with it? And I couldn't understand that, but we were getting those kind of calls.
Well, I remember the center had a panel of attorneys at the celebration of the anniversary of the Bill of Rights. And we talked about what the Bill of Rights said and why, it applied to our community or whatever. And then we opened up the auditorium for questions, and there were mics out in the audience. And this young man came up to the mic and he said, and I swear this is true, well, I understand why there's discrimination against people of color or women, but why us? Do you run into this kind of stuff when you do a show? I mean, do you get, I know that you're talking about
Sure.
people awakening to the truth of it, but what about the opposite?
Well, I think what you were talking about, it's almost all people in the world, and certainly Americans, because of some of our xenophobia and our enclosedness, we all need to develop our empathy to connect who I am, what my concerns are, the ways I feel empowered, the ways I feel disempowered, and be able to extend that empathy to people who are not the same as us. And gay people need to do that. Of course, the general population needs to do it a great deal as well, and I would certainly put more of an onus, as much as there's work the lesbian and gay community needs to do, I would also, remember that a state that is primarily vast majority heterosexuals voted by 61% to deny us the basic human right of marriage in March of this year. I woke up feeling very unhappy as a fourth-generation Californian to live in a state that doesn't respect my humanness. On the other hand, we have work to do there, and that's, we have to educate and connect and communicate and help people start to make those connections. I have found that what we're talking about, especially the binational couple issue, because it's so, partly because we start talking about American citizens. It's not just we're talking about,
right.
And Americans are very interested in Americans. And self-involved and all that. But suddenly the thought, well, I don't think, what I hear a lot when I, engage university students or a more general audience is, well, I don't think you people should have marriage rights, but it's crazy that you're having to leave because your lover is not from here. And, and that's a start. I mean, that's a beginning. That's starting to see, they're recognizing that I'm a human being, that my partner of many years that I love and cherish is valuable to me. And those are the building blocks, I hope. And I do hear a lot of that. And one of the things I'm hopeful about is partly, it takes a really mean person to think that a committed, loving partnership should be destroyed. I mean, it's just so, it goes against American sentimentality, and we're a very sentimental culture. Loving love stories in a way, and because this is about a love story, it's about people from different countries coming together against all odds and connecting. And I have found it's a way to cut through some homophobia, actually, and I've had that happen many times where you see the light bulb go on. And I think that happens within our own community too. This particular window into the immigration story is a way for people to really see, oh wait, gay people really are second-class citizens. We really don't have the same rights, because straight person A can marry someone and stay in America, and their partner can work and get all the benefits of being a U.S. citizen, and gay person B can do none of that. And that's, I think we need to keep reminding our own community that, of course, as Chris and Jeff were mentioning, that by other nation standards, we're not really a civilized nation in terms of how we treat lesbian and gay people. We could not be part of the European community of nations because of the human rights violations against gay people. We would be hauled up in front of the Court of Human Rights, as England was, to allow lesbians and gay people to serve in the military. The sodomy laws in the 15 or 16 states are considered a violation of the European Charter of Human Rights. Certainly the immigration, the breaking up of lesbian and gay families. So that's getting lesbian and gay Americans to consider, wait a minute, we're not even, we aren't leading the world in human rights in this regard by any and in many other ways. And that's a good politicizing thing, and it helps our community, I think, get more energized, and also hopefully build some empathy for the other immigration issues here, whether it's 187 as you're talking about, or these incredible stories of people deeply persecuted for being lesbian or gay. And And that I'm seeing that start to shift, which is very inspiring.
Well, it's been interesting. I don't think people really get what immigration law is at all, because they don't have to bother with it. I mean, I don't think people understand what the barriers are, not just for our community, but for everybody, to bring a family member here, or how you have to prove this and that. I mean, I remember in the battered women's movement, we had a terrible time with the fact that in this issue of sham marriages, that you would need to stay together for those 2 years and then go as a couple to prove to the INS that you were still together in order that the person who had immigrated could stay here. And we were busy trying to get battered women away from their batterers.
Right.
And so they would have to then reunite with their batterers in order to go to the INS and prove that this marriage was still going on. And eventually, the work of advocates and activists helped to change that law, so that even though the standard of proof is still very high, and it doesn't work very well still for battered women, at least they can go on their own and say, you know, I've left him because he was abusive, here are my restraining orders and whatever, and still be allowed to stay. But to make the immigration law work for real people, it's just really not been the history generally for just about anybody. And I think it's time for our community to focus on this, you know, as an issue. Do you find that many people have shown up on this issue, or are there volunteers that have come to immigration equality? Is there growth kind of in the activism on this issue?
Well, I would say as I said, we have a handful of volunteers, those who want to step out and really be outspoken, and they take the risk, you know, of probably jeopardizing the application process. And it's, but some of them also try to beat the time, you know, because their visa might expire soon. They try to do whatever they can in order to make a change, no matter how little that is.
I think most people are coming forward because they want to get their particular immigration situation solved, and then, I mean, that's their most immediate concern. So there are only a handful of people who can see beyond that, but I can understand why most people are focusing on their own immediate concerns. Interestingly, HRC, one of the premier lesbian and gay organizations, until very recently wasn't as involved in immigration issues, but through the efforts of Tim and Immigration Equality and other folks around the country, they did rally at some point around HR 3650 and lend their support to it. So I think there is some movement. You know, we do need the national groups, especially the ones that are in Washington, to help us with the lobbying, take the grassroots to that level where we can get some relief passed in legislation.
Well, the center's been kind of unique in the way it kind of melds social services and activism. Are you participating, Jeff, in this in these issues as well from an activist point of view, or is the center advocating as well as simply doing, which is a good job, you know, one person at a time, direct services?
I think the center's trying to, I mean, obviously we're primarily a social services agency, but we also see that we can't just be responding to, just putting out fires. We want to try to do, you know, broader public policy measures that can eliminate even the fire starting. So, for instance, with 187, and we did take a stand on that, and we lent some leadership. We are looking at this amnesty issue and how we can work on that, you know, how we can work with other organizations, other mainstream immigrant rights organizations to kind of build that movement of social justice where all of the issues are kind of connected and move forward.
Well, I think it's interesting because we're joining essentially two disempowered groups here. Because they, you know, when you have two embattled minorities and you get a twofer that way, it's very difficult to, I think, get people, you know, if you're talking about the Gay Lawyers Association, then at least as attorneys we have some clout and we can bring that to the issue. But I would think it would exacerbate the problem that immigrants themselves are so generally without resources, and as you said, worried about their own status. I mean, it's such a threatening situation, the INS.
I think that's where the bill, the Permanent Partners Immigration Reform Act, is so important because it gives literally every single American voter a job to do, which is if we can, well, first of all, sadly, because at this point there are 53 sponsors of the bill, all of them Democratic Congress people. What a surprise. And not only is no Republican sponsored, but we have the complete hostility of the current Congressman Smith, who has basically indicated in print that he will never allow the bill to reach the floor. So I really feel on November 7th, unless the Democratic Party takes back the U.S. House of Representatives and Vice President Gore becomes President Gore, I feel like there's no hope for my family to remain in the United States. And shortly after that, we will probably begin the process of immigration asylum in Canada, which gives me an enormous job in the next couple months. And I'm really wringing the arms of family members and friends and people I come in contact with, and people who suggest there's no difference between the parties, which is complete nonsense. So this is a very good little laser beam on that, because of course Vice President Gore has come out in support of lesbian and gay binational couples and reforming this. We have many, dozens of Democratic Congress people. So even here in California, where I of course hope that our state, which did not step to the bat in the way I would have liked on the Knight initiative, but I'm hoping our state is going to turn the U.S. Congress back to the Democratic Party, and then the Nadler bill, H.R. 3650, can begin a process of really giving this one basic, Chris was using the word cruelty, which I think I'm going to start borrowing as I talk about this. It's profoundly cruel to be harassing loving partners in this way. So I've never felt an election means more than this one.
Well, obviously I agree, not only from the partisan point of view, but because there are so many things that an elected body like the Congress or the state legislature really has control over. I mean, in California, I vote on 4,000 bills every 2 years. And every single one of them affects quite a number of lives in one way or another. Not everybody's life.
Right.
It might only have to do with a locality or, a thin slice of humanity or children in kindergarten or whatever. But there's an enormous affect, and when people campaign, we can't talk about every single one of the issues. We simply can't. There are too many. So it's important to realize how many things that we don't even know about hang in the balance on this election, any election, but particularly this election. Because I think the cruelty that you talked about, people say, well, you don't have a right to be here in the country if you weren't born here. You don't have a right. And we would agree. You don't have a right. But if you're going to create a right or an ability to be here, as we have with marriage, just across the board without question, then the equality aspect of it, it seems to me, comes to light. Have you had much success in, you said that what immigration equality does is to provide support for these couples. Have you had any success, or is it just really,
Well, I would say a few months ago we had a potluck, and it was, I would say it was very successful. If you have about 24 people coming, I think this is a big success compared to the whole situation and issue. And we really try to make them feel comfortable, also looking for places that are not so threatening. But I mean, there's a constant fear, as I said, so that they're even not necessarily able to enjoy even going there, because then well, I'm going there, and with this regarding this immigration issue, and who knows how long we still can be together. And I mean, it's psycho stress from A through Z, permanent.
So does every couple lose? I mean, we're simply out of luck on this at the moment?
Well, at the moment, to me, you have to, as Tim said, separate or leave the country or going underground or whatever it is. It's no fun at all, because
or you just
everybody loses.
Spending thousands of dollars and countless hours trying to stay in the United States through a variety of, you have to jump through a variety of hoops. It is really cruel.
Like what, Jeff? What do people, I mean, I don't want to say that we're doing, the wrong thing. We're trying to save our lives here and our
Many of our
families.
couples, they respect the law and they want to be here legally. And so they have to research, they have to hire attorneys, who are very expensive.
Stay in school forever.
Go find another job that maybe you know, isn't really connected to their skills, but they can stay because of that. And so it's just so many hoops they have to jump through. It is like, it's mental anguish. I mean, some of the steps that the people have to take just to stay here with their lover.
So what do you do to help couples when they come to you as the expert on immigration at the Gay and Lesbian Center? I mean, it seems to me you're almost limited to nothing but reality therapy.
But that's very important, because there are also a lot of unscrupulous people who prey on immigrants in any community, promising them, you know, for $10,000 I'll get you this or that, when it's completely bogus. But a lot of people are so desperate that they fall into that trap. So the reality counseling is really important. But then we also we are blessed with attorneys from the community who are just, you know, very creative and very dedicated, and they will counsel people on some of the ways, because they've seen this situation so many times. They'll counsel people on some of the ways that people can stay legally in the United States. It's going to take some more resources, more time, more headaches, but you know, increasingly just being legal in the United States is really important. So that's part of what we do.
And also just because I've received, you know, probably a dozen emails a day from a binational couple in Minnesota or Florida or somewhere, just because people from touring, and I always put my email out. Just providing some kind of community, just as 30 years ago in the nascent lesbian and gay movement, you are not alone. It's not just you, and to know you are one of many thousands of lesbian and gay binational couples, and it's very, very powerful, especially at a moment where someone's just, their partner has been refused entry at an airport, or they just had to separate. It's such a fragile human moment, and just that there's others here, there is hope, though the reality therapy thing at this point, it's grim. There is this glimmer that, you know, change could come, and America could join the community of civilized nations sometime soon in this regard. It's definitely not hopeless right now, though November 8th will tell us what degree it is hopeful, clearly.
And it's not an issue that we can go state by state on, because this is clearly just a federal issue. So it wouldn't be that some enlightened state, maybe this one and maybe not this one, could say, well, you're welcome here, you know, because we are absolutely precluded from doing anything about immigration.
A Vermont binational couple is in no better situation in terms of immigration. They're better in every other way, or most other ways, but none of the federal rights.
If they can stay there.
Right, they still are going to probably have to move 300 miles north to Quebec.
Although local governments can take a moral stand, like they did in San Francisco, to pass an act of refuge saying, you know, it's symbolic, but it's basically on the side of the plight of binational couples. And I know that you're working on one with the city of West Hollywood, right?
Say something about that,
I mean,
Chris?
it's actually what the city of San Francisco did with their resolution. This indicates, you know, to people, it gives them, I think, a much needed moral support. And this is, as Tim said, too, you know, to make them understand, there are some people already working on this issue. They are aware of this cruelty, and there is hope. And I think this is the most important message to even get out, that there is hope. I mean, 14 other countries so far passed laws specifically to allow your foreign same-sex partner to immigrate. Germany is working on a law right now. I mean, I don't know if America can always exclude itself from the rest of the world, you know.
Well, it's always a struggle here, isn't it, between our worst selves and our better selves. You know, I mean, and you talk about partisan politics, and yet, of course, I run into people in my own party who don't get this.
Sure.
And I'm not excusing it. Obviously, this vote in this November, or if we're in rerun, then of course we know how it turned out, but we don't know how it will turn out. Really is an important thing, and something that people haven't thought of really at all. So what would you encourage people watching the show to do right now?
Register if you haven't.
Register to vote, good.
You have a week left in California to do that.
Right.
Call your congressperson. If nothing else, I always tell people at the end of my shows, even if you don't know binational couple, you know me now. You've listened to me yammer for 90 minutes. Tell them, my friend Tim, an American citizen, contributed greatly, to, you know, founded 2 arts organizations, blah, 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 is forced to leave the country because we don't recognize his partner. Call and express that someone you know in your community is being being forced to do that. And people, they send me emails, I felt so empowered, I'd never called my congressperson. You know, that's hugely, hugely important as well.
Yeah, people don't call. I mean, a lot of people don't call me, they don't send
Right.
emails, they don't think either they don't think it's going to do any good, or they don't know that you can just do that. But it is a very powerful thing to do. Well, amazingly enough, we're out of time. And I'm really, really grateful to the three of you for elucidating this issue. There will be some names and phone numbers at the end under the titles of the show if you're interested in contacting Immigration Equality or the task force in your area. I think that we are going to win this struggle. It may take a while. I hope that you will participate in every way you can, that you'll vote, that you'll organize, that you'll raise your voice, and that in terms of binational couples, we'll be able to get used to it. Thanks.